Hello, everyone. I'm Lisa Kingo, the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you to the session on personal leadership for the global goals, hosted in collaboration between Compact and Russell Reynolds Associates. I think by now it has become very clear for all of us in this summit that the need for genuine values-based leadership has never been greater. As we have heard throughout the summit, we are currently not on track to meet the 2030 agenda on sustainable development, and COVID-19 is further exposing the fragile nature of our progress to date and fundamental weaknesses, inequalities, and systemic racism in our global system. So the killing of George Floyd is one of the most recent expression of anti-Black racism and injustice, and all leaders must reject racism in all its forms, of course. So now is the time for all companies to make leadership personal and raise the ambition for people and planet. This is more than a matter of strategy, policy, and process. It's fundamentally around personal leadership and people. So boards and C-suite executives have a huge opportunity to make sustainable business central to their organization's culture and leadership. But yet very few CEOs, board, or other senior leadership appointments make sustainable business experience or mindset a requirement. So for this reason, Compact and Russell Reynolds set out on a collaboration to answer a very important question. How can organizations make sustainable business core to the DNA of their leadership teams? So we had a great launch of the white paper during the opening session yesterday. And today I'm very pleased to introduce you to Hans Royce and Simon Kingston from Russell Reynolds Associates to share the insights from the Leadership for the Decade of Action, the new Compact Russell Reynolds study of the characteristics of sustainable leaders. So, and from there, we will be joined by 3 very impressive CEOs and board members for an engaging discussion on what personal leadership for the goals might actually look like in practice and what next generation leaders can learn from this. So Simon, over to you.
Lisa, thank you. It's a huge privilege for us at Russell Reynolds to partner with you and UNGC in this new way that you and Clark launched yesterday. So thank you. For all of those who are watching and joining this session, if you double click on the screen share panel on your screen, you'll bring up the slides that will accompany this this presentation. Briefly, my name is Simon Kingston. I co-lead the non-profit sector for Russell Reynolds, and along with colleagues including Hans, we've had the pleasure of working with UNGC in this endeavor. And what Hans and I are going to do now, briefly before we move to the panel discussion, is to talk you through the findings of that work that Lisa referred to. We all know that if we're going to deliver the SDGs by 2030, the private sector has to be the driver of that change. The UNGC has been a champion of that for 2 decades, as we know, and increasingly the language of sustainability is audibly in the mainstream of business conversations. But we also know that there's a huge gap between that discussion and real action. There's a gap between the rhetoric of sustainability and the reality. If we spool forward to the first of the slides, Hans, on that. In the course of the preparation for this work, UNGC polled a broad range of chief executives, and almost all of them agreed with the idea that sustainability is important to the future success of their business. About 92% of CEOs say that, but fewer than half of them, notwithstanding that, report actually systematically integrating sustainability into their business operations. And their view of business more broadly is even gloomier again. Only 1 in 5 of those CEOs asked actually believes that business is currently playing that critical role in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. So sadly for all of us, we begin the decade of action with a pattern of inaction. But as Lisa and others have been saying over the last 24 hours, this can change. We do have the opportunity to put the world onto a trajectory in which global warming of 1.5 degrees is possible. We can reduce global inequity, something that's desperately needed and has been so clearly illustrated in recent and tragic events. And we can achieve the SDGs by 2030. But realizing that opportunity now requires a closing of this gap between rhetoric and reality. Hans.
And at Russell Reynolds Associates, our mission is to improve the way the world is led. Every year, we help clients around the world with appointing thousands of leaders into C-suite positions and board positions. We wanted to understand to what extent sustainability is a factor when appointing such leaders. So we analyzed close to 4,000 executive and board position specifications and found that in 15% of these cases, those position specifications make clear reference to sustainability or similar words such as the Sustainable Development Goals, social impact, ESG, etc. The key question is whether these words merely describe the company or do they describe the responsibility of the position and the requirements for being appointed in that position. Unfortunately, we found that in only 4% of the position specifications, sustainability experience or mindset was an explicit requirement to get the position. In other words, 1 out of 6 companies is embedding sustainability into the description about their company, which is a good thing, but only 1 out of 25 companies is explicitly requiring leaders in the C-suite to have experience with sustainability. Accelerating progress against the Sustainable Development Goals, as described by Lisa previously, means that C-suite leaders and teams will need to meet several additional requirements. After all, as we all know, change starts at the top. Simon, over to you.
So as Lisa mentioned, with UNGC, we at Russell Reynolds set out to answer a really critical question. How do we make sustainability central to the character of business leadership teams in the future? Now, we know that there are a group of pioneer CEOs and other leaders who have made sustainability a defining characteristic of the way they do business. And we had the privilege of talking to 55 of them to discover how they've done so. This group of pioneers, as we called them, were drawn from a very broad range of business sectors and regions of the world, and about a third of them were women leaders. And our analysis was aimed at identifying the differentiating characteristics of their leadership, their motivation, their competencies, and crucially, the actions that they've taken. Because by identifying those differentiators, what we hope to do is equip organizations to identify, to enable, and to develop sustainable leaders now and in the future. To be clear, this group of people to whom we spoke are all, without exception, highly successful commercial leaders. The bar for inclusion was set at the top level. What we're interested in is what they've done beyond that to really make sustainability the defining quality of their leadership. They haven't simply advocated for it. They've innovated, they've pushed real change in their organizations, and through a set of concrete actions, they've made their organizations sustainable. Now, before we talk about the differentiators that emerged in that work, it's helpful maybe to consider the experiences of these individuals and what prompted them to engage in the subject so deeply. And what emerged from the group that we discussed were 3 broad categories of people. The first group, who we call the born believers. These are people who described a passion for sustainability for environment and social issues as something that had been part of their makeup from the very beginning. They talk about their upbringing, their formation as young people, as the critical factors. There's a second group, those that we call the convinced, who described a realization of the centrality of sustainability as something that was a cumulative process as their careers unfolded. And then a third group, the group we call the awoken. And they talk about their perspective being transformed by a critical event or experience in the course of their lives and careers. Now, it would be easy to assume that most of our pioneers were born believers, and many of them are, just under half of them in the group are. But just as many have come to their focus on sustainability through experience. They are the convinced, as well as the awoken. And that matters, that observation, for two reasons. First, it tells us there are probably more real or potential sustainable leaders out there than one might think at first blush. And secondly, and crucially, it tells us that sustainable leaders are made as well as born. We can cultivate a new generation of leaders with these qualities. So the background of these individuals provide also some insight into how we might think about doing that. We compared the career experiences of our pioneering leaders, currently in CEO roles, to a controlled group of sitting CEOs from across Fortune 500 companies who aren't defined by their sustainability. And when we looked into their career experiences, we found that they are 3 times more likely to have worked on 2 or more continents than their non-sustainable peers. Furthermore, 1 in 3 of the sustainable CEOs who originally came from the global north had spent time working in the global south. And that compares to only 1 in 10 of their non-sustainable peers. So while we're wary of inferring too critical and too evident a causality, it's really interesting when you talk to these people, because they cite that breadth of cultural and geographical experience frequently as the thing that formed them. And it's not surprising. A broad worldview comes from a view of the world that itself is broad, and an experience of the world that is broad. And the other thing that's interesting when we looked at the pattern of these careers is that sustainable leaders are twice as likely to have had experience in working across 2 or more functions within their organization. So the breadth is geographical and it is disciplinary. Hans.
We've discussed the journey to sustainability of these leaders, both in terms of their motivation and their experience. I hear a bit of an echo. But what are the attributes that make a sustainable leader sustainable? Sustainable leaders combine a sustainable mindset with 4 differentiating leadership attributes. First and foremost, sustainable leaders fundamentally believe that sound financial performance and sustainability go hand in hand. It's not either or, but both and. Sustainable leaders go beyond a deep understanding of their own organizational system and incorporate the interplay with the larger economic, societal, and environmental systems around them. They have a holistic, long-term vision and turn sustainability into a competitive advantage, both in the long-term financial interests of the company itself and in the interest of society. The second attribute I would mention is stakeholder inclusion. Sustainable leaders don't just manage, they include them. They understand a wide range of points of view, create and share value with all their key stakeholders. For example, during today's Corona crisis, several CEOs we interviewed offered more favorable payment conditions to key suppliers or customers to ensure their partnership survived well beyond the crisis. The third attribute I would mention is disruptive innovation. Sustainable leaders are willing to disrupt their business and industry. They ask why it cannot be done differently. They make bold investments in, for instance, R&D, research and development that test the limits of what is possible and drive the innovation that is needed to find novel solutions that are both profitable and sustainable. Again, both and. And last but by no means least, sustainable leaders do not simply have a long-term orientation. They also set audacious goals and rigorously drive concerted action and investments in pursuit of those goals. They stay the course in the face of setbacks and make decisions that may be unpopular with short-term oriented stakeholders. This model of the sustainable leader provides a critical blueprint for organizations as they consider the sustainable leaders for a decade of action. So how would that work? In order for CEOs and board members to effectively integrate sustainability into business strategy and operations, they must embed it in the leadership culture of the organization. The best organizations we found are taking concerted steps to embed sustainability into the frameworks and processes that drive how leaders are selected, promoted, rewarded, and developed. This provides a powerful signal from the top that the top team will back its commitment to sustainability with real decisions about current and future leaders. So let me start with selection. To begin with, organizations should take a hard look at how they select new leaders. It's critical that boards and CEOs make sustainable leadership a key selection criterion when appointing leaders in all functional areas. We'll take a deeper look into this in a moment. The second point is about succession. We find it's imperative that discussions of sustainable leadership are embedded in your succession management frameworks and planning. That not only ensures companies have top-tier sustainable leaders lined up, but it also sends a powerful signal to employees and external stakeholders. The third one is reward. Once companies have established enterprise sustainability that are fully anchored in the business strategy and governance of the business, the next step is to integrate those strategic sustainability goals into the objectives and, very importantly, the compensation of board members, CEOs, and other executives. And the last one is about development. It's vital to develop sustainable leaders who understand how and why sustainability issues are material to the long-term financial success of the company. We recommend making a sustainable mindset and leadership attributes a core focus of internal and external leadership development programs, and offer, let me advance that one, and offer crucible experience, be they specific roles or project, for your up-and-coming leaders that will stretch and develop their sustainable leadership capabilities. Now, you might ask, many companies have carefully selected and developed the best available leaders over the years. What makes sustainable leaders different from other leaders? When assessing leadership talent, there are three levels to be considered. Most visible is their track record. What have the leaders actually accomplished? One level deeper are their competencies. How have they accomplished this? And thirdly, their mindset and values. Why were they driven to accomplish this? And what were the drivers to accomplish even more in the future? Sustainable leaders are first and foremost top-tier leaders. They have to tick all of the usual boxes. And this includes, as you can see here on the slide, they must have relevant industry experience, functional experience, geographic experience, as well as having led organizations of relevant scale and complexity. When it comes to their competencies, top-tier leaders must be highly effective in setting strategy, executing, influencing, and leading teams. And more specifically, we know that the best leaders are effective at these because they're able to span across seemingly competing traits. Take executing as an example. They must be able to take major risks in some situations, but in other situations be quite reluctant with new initiatives, knowing that their organization can handle only so much. And finally, mindset and values. Obviously, impeccable integrity must be table stakes for positions of power and responsibility. But to identify sustainable leaders, we need to go one step beyond and look for an additional set of indicators. As we look at their track record, ask ourselves the following question. Can the candidate articulate multiple examples of increasingly sustainable business initiatives connected to the core strategy? To be clear here, we're not looking for side projects or superficial one-liners. Rather, has the leader made sustainability increasingly core to the business or function he or she has led over the last, say, 5 or 10 years? And did he or she learn and recover from mistakes or setbacks? On the competency front, we need to test for the 4 critical leadership attributes we highlighted earlier. So multi-level systems thinking, stakeholder inclusion, disruptive innovation, and long-term activation. And finally, as it relates to values and mindset, it is crucial to probe whether or not the candidate has a sustainable mindset. Do they truly believe that business needs to be both profitable and sustainable? And to avoid politically correct answers, a trained interviewer is not going to ask them outright about this, but rather use questions such as, what is your vision for your current business and industry, and how should it measure success? Who do you view as your major stakeholders in your current position? And can you give examples of how you collectively created and shared value? And what role does sustainability play in your personal life? Can you give examples? What candidates share spontaneously during an interview is much more telling than their ability to deliver well-crafted statements to questions specifically about sustainability. On that note, Simon, over to you.
Well, thank you. We've tried to cover quite a lot of ground, and hopefully our statements on sustainability have been reasonably well crafted. But what we wanted to do now was move from the abstract to the applied. And we are very fortunate to have 3 leaders of businesses who have put sustainability right at the heart of the strategies that they've created. And so we're going to spend some time now putting some questions to each of the 3, and then hoping we have an illuminating discussion as a result. And our 3 guests are Flora Mutahi, the Chief Executive of Melvin Marsh, also the Chair of the Kenyan Association of Manufacturing, Feke Shibshma, the Honorary Chair of DSM, and Francesco Aji, the Chief Executive of Enel. And we'll ask each of them a few questions in turn. I'll start with Flora. Flora, I mean, unlike some of the others that we've been talking to, you are someone who as an entrepreneur, built a business from scratch at Melvin, and have created something that's transformed the sector in Kenya. Can you talk a little bit about how, in that context, you came to place sustainability at the heart of the business, and why, given that there must have been so many other pressures on your time as a leader?
All right, thank you very much. And I guess it's good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, based on where our members are. Yes, my name is Flora Mutahi. I'm the CEO of Melvin Marsh. It's actually the largest flavored tea company in Kenya. And I'm the immediate past chairperson of the Association of Manufacturers, but I am the chairperson of the Kenya Anti-Counterfeit. So I do wear several hats. So my journey with sustainability really began when I joined the Association of Manufacturers, which must have been about 12 years ago. And at the time, they had been asked by the government to actually manage energy efficiency. And this was in 2006. So we started running these energy efficiency programs. We did energy audits, wastewater, and we really focused on renewables, doing training people, feasibility studies, having awards, conferences. And I was amazed at the kind of numbers people were recording, when we go into the factories and did this audits and actually started showing them. And we continue to have these all the way up to now. And I must say, maybe that's where my journey began. I got the logic. I got the fact that sustainability can save you money, and sustainability is not only about spending money. It actually makes logical sense. Secondly, the association was also the host of the local network. So I then started continuing to interact with, the principles. And again, they made logical sense to me. Whether we are talking human rights, environment, labor, it really made a lot of sense. And they challenged me around about 2016, as I was coming into the helm to be the chairperson, that, hey, you've been around us, you're very interested in this area. Why don't you sign up your company? So being, well, I would call myself like a medium-sized company, not too big, not too small. And I had all these arguments of why not. But, after one conversation, actually, I said, this does make sense. And I totally believe, and till today, I believe sustainability, you can save a lot, but more importantly, as the leader, you cannot just continue to look at the top line. You've got to look at the bottom line as well. But interestingly enough, that bottom line can actually, also bring in profits into your organization. So obviously, I had personal challenges as a female in a male-dominated. There was a lot of challenges around, like currently, we do not have many women in manufacturing. And, as much as I interrogated this, I realized, they just don't have the room to grow. They don't have the interest. And in that, I started we started a program called Women in Manufacturing. And that is where, as well, my journey with the gender became really pronounced. So we do run the program up to now where we mentor, we help, develop policies, we challenge the education system to really really improve this gender gap for women in the manufacturing space. Of course, then I got called into the anti-corruption organization. And again, through trainings of CAM, it really made sense to me. So sustainability, you'd say, to me was logical, it made sense, and it was the right thing to do. Still remains so.
And so would you describe yourself as a born believer? Were these values always something that ran through the way you ran the business, or was it something that in that transition to taking on the association role came to you as a realization?
I think what the association did, having interacted, of course, with way larger companies than myself, seeing what it can do, it must have been in my DNA for it to resonate. And I do believe nobody can push sustainability if it doesn't resonate with your values and who you are and what you want to see for this planet. I don't believe in let's just get profits and abuse everything. No, we really need to make this place a way better place than we are. And everything from the circular economy. I remember being at the helm when Kenya banned plastics, and I had to be at the forefront telling the government, wrong thing to do. But really, we were saying it's not the wrong thing to do. It was just done in a very short period of time. So we had to change the conversation and say, give us a little bit more time, which didn't happen. But it was a chance to really, really engage with what you believe in.
And that will come back, I suspect, later in the conversation to the role that governments and regulators should play in helping to deliver sustainable goals. But one thing when we spoke, Flora, before we move on to Feka, you said something when we asked you about the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for discussing business goals and business outcomes. You said they're known, but they're not understood. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I suspect that's an almost universal experience in parts of the private sector.
Yes, it is. And I believe that's what the work of the UN Global Compact is, to really try and disseminate. Because for me, once I signed up and I started following the framework and including the women empowerment principles, it continued to make sense. And the more I interact with our members, you can see we sort of understand the SDGs, but the practicality, how do I make it happen? And this is where peer learning is very important, sharing experiences, really getting them to engage and learn from each other. I believe that is where we really need to focus in the next 10 years going, if we're really, really going to make this happen. And I admire the way we launched the ambition platform, because we do need to get this happening. The conversation is out there. We understand the circular, we understand the environment, we understand it, but are we living it? Is it in our KPIs, like Hans has said? Has it been built into has it been systemized in our organization and built through our KPIs and rewarded? And I believe very few organizations right now are doing that. We have had, I'm sure you know, the successes in a lot of SMEs in Kenya, funnily enough, because the large organizations have looked at their supply chain and said, hey, we want to introduce the SDGs to you. We want you to subscribe to them. And that is how we're going to do business. So interestingly enough, we do have a really large, I think over 50% of our local member networks are the SMEs. And that is brilliant, because for us, the SMEs make 85% of our private sector. So we're going about it the right way, but we need to continue engaging and really giving them a platform, which we do, to continue to peer learn and really drive sustainability.
Thank you. Hans.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Feike, you hold a number of board roles, supervisory board roles, have had, in the past and still do at Philips and Unilever, the Dutch Central Bank. But you've also been the CEO of DSM, a company with roughly 9 billion euro revenues, focusing on nutrition, specialty materials. And under your leadership, DSM share price quadrupled over a period of 13 years. But at the same time, you led the business in a very sustainable way, focusing on 5 sustainable development goals in particular. My question to you is, how would you describe your own sustainability mindset? In other words, what motivated you personally to do this?
Feike, you're still on mute, I think.
I think you're on mute, Feike.
Apologies, then I need to shout very much to hear me. Apologies. Now, thanks for organizing this conference, and thanks for what Flora shared with us. I think very important to talk about those topics. Let me start that what drives me is a combination of logical business sense and personal values. And the combination of those two, I think, brought us also that success. For me, CSR, corporate social responsibility activities, once had its purpose or once was useful, but maybe today it is out. Because it sounds a little bit, you have the company in its core, and on the side you have some CSR activities. That's not the way it goes for me. You go deeper to your responsibility you have as a company, to your personal values, and then you don't do things on the side, you do things in the core of your business. So I think every company which wants to be long-lasting has this obligation to look to its purpose. What is our meaning in life? What's our contribution to the economy? The economy never started by making money. It started by helping each other to live well here all together. And therefore, as a company, you can look to the SDGs where you can contribute, most likely not to all SDGs, hopefully not to no SDGs. Then you should really look to where your company belong on this planet. By the way, sidetrack, but there is still something not wholly okay with the SDGs. It is the global strategy, the global goals where the world wants to go to. And only the boardroom of the world, the elite, is aware of it. The rest of the world does not know yet so much about the SDGs. That is not good. But nevertheless, as a company, you have to look where you can contribute in the core of your business. And if in the core of your business you can contribute to the SDGs, then you have combined doing business with your values and contributing to a better life on this planet. And then automatically, if you do it well, you can contribute to sustainability, climate, and what have you, and having good returns at the same moment. Building on what you said in the introduction, we have seen also in several surveys that many CEOs and many companies agree with that. Sometimes when we did surveys, it said, for who of you climate is important? Almost 100% said yes. Who of you is discussing this on a regular basis in the board? 30% say yes. So here, I think many companies see this point, but don't discuss it often enough. And why not? Because I think because it's not incorporated in the core of the business, because then automatically you will discuss it in your board. So what do you need to do? You need to combine the long term with the short term. You need to combine shareholders' value and stakeholders' value. You need to combine where you can contribute to the world and where it automatically, if it is in the core of the business, contributes to you, and triggering system changes. Last on this one, for me, it is a combination of common business sense and values. And I always predict if I die sounds a little bit sad, but one day it will come. And I have kind of view that I have done a last discussion with my kids and my wife and looking back to my life. And I hope that we have contributed something during that life. So it has strongly to do with values. And I realize, building on that, that values are in fact only relevant when they are tested. When they are not tested, we have all values. So the question is, incorporate it in your core and see whether you still stick to it in difficult times. And we try to.
And that, thank you, Frank. And that's what the sustainable mindset indeed is all about. I'd like to shift gears to another part of the model, and that is disruptive innovation. During our conversations a few months ago, you mentioned a new cattle feed product which substantially reduces methane emissions by cattle. Can you tell us more, please, and especially about the barriers that you had to overcome to launch that product?
Yeah, the product is called Clean Cow. You know that cows emit on the front end and the rear end of the cow methane, which is much more powerful than CO2 and therefore creates climate change. And we started a big program already 8-9 years ago, what we called climate change induced innovation. Can we find further technologies, tricks, things we can develop which help addressing climate change? And we had a discussion about methane emissions of cows. And we got a very interesting discussion that some people said, yeah, but officially the emission of cows don't count. And they are not under the ETS system in Europe or any carbon pricing system, so they don't count. And myself and our chief innovation officer said, what do you mean don't count? I mean, is there modern errors who said, well, certain emissions I count, certain emissions I don't count. I mean, it doesn't work like that. So even when it is not addressed yet economically, it is a problem. So can we not put effort in finding an ingredient which can reduce by better metabolism in the cow of the feed, so it reduces the methane emissions with 30%. We found that ingredient, 30% reduction, and it's very great. Now then we went to the farmers and said, do you want to use it? The farmers said, great, but we are exempted, as you know, so we don't want to pay. And we went to the feed companies. Do you want to introduce it? Well, if my customers want it, I said, well, don't ask, those are the farmers. Maybe they don't want to pay now. Then we went to governments. Said, yeah, but do we need to oblige this? Yeah, otherwise it doesn't work. Well, to do this to farmers, not easily politically. And we went to dairy companies and said, do you want to reduce your scope 3 emissions by using this? And there we saw much more interest. So you see here also that it is the mindset of finding the innovation, even innovations in area which are so-called exempted. And then if you have the innovation, also not only trying to register it and all that stuff which we're busy with now, but also finding who are the right customers. And here you see that those kind of innovations are not done in a day and require some time, but we will come there. And we will help to reduce the emissions of cows.
Fantastic example of a question, why can't it be done differently, not settling for the status quo. Thank you, Feiken. Simon, over to you.
I'd like to turn to Francesco. Francesco, you lead an organization that is both a leader of thought and a leader of action in the transition away from traditional carbon-based energy sources towards renewable ones. But can you talk first of all, as we've asked the others, a bit about your personal experience of this and why you've come to decide to lead in the way that you do before we come into the details of that?
Okay, thank you. You've been quite clever in handling the two of you this seminar. Congratulations. Well, I think that, basically, looking at the report you made, I have to say, I think we are all born sustainable somehow, but some of us are conscious of it from the beginning, and some other kind of remain in a sleeping state until something wakes them up into that status. And I think I am in that category. So it's been quite a long process. It started with a very far away in time episode of my professional life, where we built a power plant in a very remote country in the desert. And then discovered when this plant was finished that there was no load to feed into the network. And that the whole plan was to create artificial cities with air conditioning to stop nomadic tribes to move around, which for me was like an epiphany of what totally unsustainable concepts you can think of. And I could go on for a long time, but this was just the beginning of a thinking process that all of a sudden awoke something in me. But then when I joined the NL, I think basically we started this journey asking a very simple question, that is, why are we doing what we're doing? So what's the purpose of our actions and the reason for being of the company itself? And I think this was just lack from my side, and because electricity companies, utilities, are basically useful. That's the name. So we exist because we're useful. And then you reflect about the spirit of service that is embedded and it's in the genes of utilities, and you find out that on that, over the decades, unsustainable practices were hardwired that removed the original purpose and the mission to be useful for society and be good for society. That was at the beginning of the whole process itself. So we had a journey of discovering the roots of our existence. Why are we there? And remove all the things that were deposited over decades of practices and economics and whatever made little sense. So, it was more a question of removing stuff than adding. So discovering the real reason for our actions and reflect on the fact that can we be successful and thrive if we are not good for society in general? And the answer was no. We are not a hit and run organization, no matter what. So we are here on the long time, for the long haul. We are here to do good for society. And there's so many ways. I think it's absolutely 100% proven. And I think the economic, the financial success of our company is a testimony of it, that sustainability and financial performances go hand in hand. It's also 100% proven and true what Feike just said, that you need innovation to drive sustainability into the economic system of the world, because you need to change the way practices are embedded into society. And to do that, you need innovation. And in fact, we coupled the two things in one in NL. It's called innovability. So we have an organization that works on the innovation and the sustainable front together, because we need both to successfully project this trend. So I find a lot of truth in what Feike just said on this example of the cow. It's beautiful, but I think there's so many other places where innovation can really help.
And when Feike was talking about having to push hard to have that innovation recognized and picked up, and what was your experience of that? Did the leadership team at NL instantly get this?
What we need to do was to remove the culture, the fear of making mistakes. A utility cannot make a mistake, because mistakes we make are terrible for society in general. It's usually they end up in people without power, which is terrible. So the embedded culture in the utility is first avoid mistakes, second avoid mistakes, third avoid mistakes, then everything, which is not really inclusive to innovation, basically. So we had to clean up and say, it's okay to have a mistake now and then. And so we started a big contest saying my best failure, which was come up with your mistakes and have anybody else judge. And this competition, we did twice just to say diffuse the fear of mistakes. And then we started saying it's okay to come with problems without solutions. So you didn't need to have a solution every time you discover a problem. Just throw problems out, and then find somebody else that can find a solution to a problem. So we focused on problems to solve that had to do with the business practice that we found not particularly sustainable, which were not easy to solve at the beginning. And then, this process started. We found help outside in innovation hubs, which we placed in different parts of the world. We have 10 now: Israel, Moscow, the Silicon Valley, Rio. We have different places where we throw problems and we come with solutions. And when our employees saw that, understood that to come up with a problem without necessarily bringing the solution, then they started having solutions too. So they got off this concern of being criticized and being told it's impossible. We said, no, let's try, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't matter. We try again, something else. So this freed up the courage to innovate. And because we are a big company, and we stick to our business, so we try not to go into, for example, farming cows. But when we come with solutions, people like it.
And do you see that in the next generation? I mean, in terms of what we were talking about earlier about systematizing a sustainable approach in the next generation of leaders, do you see different characteristics in the rising leadership cadre of NL now?
I think what your observation, I think it was you, Simon, that observed this geographical and multitasking attributes of sustainable leaders. That's true. I mean, we tend to observe that if a manager has been exposed to at least 2 or 3 more functions and has moved around geographies, it's more likely to have developed a sustainability inclination, and it's more able to reflect on it and act fast on that. And because we are now quite spread out geographically and go across the value chain, I would say that the new generation leaders have an advantage when compared to those that were exposed only to one single country and one single job for decades. That's a little bit more common. So in that sense, yes. I don't think it's a generational problem. I don't think it's an age issue. It's an issue of what experience you're exposed to, basically.
So it's interesting. Travel wakes them up, you might say.
I think different cultures make a big difference, because you tend to relax and accept what is basically what your culture accepts, which is not necessarily sustainable. Yeah. I mean, moving around shows that there are things that are not exactly right.
And I suspect all three will want to comment on this, but Flora mentioned the role of government in changing legislation. Obviously, in a European context, regulation of the utility sector is a very big part of your reality. What do you think the proper role is of the relationship between government and new regulation and private sectors who lead the way you do?
I can tell you, because we are in different time zones. We are in Russia, we are in the US, we are in Europe, we are in Latin America. So we cover a lot of different regulatory frameworks. Honestly, I think what Flora said is absolutely right. It's clearly critical that the regulator or the government have an active role on this. Europe is at the forefront on sustainability at this moment. Maybe it will be changed in the future, but there is a sensitivity and a focus that drives regulation in certain directions, without which some progresses would probably stall for a long time or would not happen at all. So I think, at least in our sector, it's absolutely important that the regulators and the government are active in the right direction. And I think in that sense that the Global Compact has a lot to say. I mean, the Global Compact is an incredible tool to explain in a language that governments and regulators can understand what sustainability is all about. I'm not saying that they're stupid. I'm just saying they have sometimes a different set of priorities. Okay, so it's important that they are put in the right context.
Well, to add, if I may, Simon, Hans, to Francesco, I think the governments should be maybe more aware that they have tools in their hands to unlock the potential of innovations in the business sector. Governments can put a price on carbon. Companies can prepare for that by putting an internal price on carbon. But governments can introduce a carbon pricing system and even making it more efficient and at a higher level. That would unlock a lot of potential. Even many businesses are indicating that. Government and regulators can say to companies that they need to be much more transparent, looking to the TCFD, a task force for climate-related matters, to disclose that. Where much more transparency is given, maybe on request of regulators by companies to investors. Governments can take care of a kind of level playing field. There's discussions about border taxes, etc. Or, as we discussed, to exempt or not exempt cows, where our planet most likely will not accept it. So there are all those kind of things, not to do the innovations, not to do the actual things. Companies need to do that, but to set the framework in which the innovations will flourish. And I think that is how the collaboration between the public and the private sector could work.
I completely agree with Feike, and I think that, you know, if you take, for example, the reporting issue, I think you mentioned that, Hans, to put together a report that combines financial performance and sustainability performance in a way that you can see the influence that one has on the other is a big way in which then companies can understand and are sometimes forced or sometimes just gently encouraged to go and really reflect on what sustainability is all about. In 2019, we presented for the first time a full integrated reporting in Enel, that is a financial reporting that is fully integrated with the SDG, with the sustainability. We don't have two separate reporting. We have one that intertwines both. You can have a look at it on the site. Of course, you know, 3 years from now we will say, oh, this was really rough, but you know, it's a beginning. And I think if this would become some kind of a guidance for companies, you would probably see what Feike said. You know, companies then would kind of develop their own mindset in their own ways, but it's up to governments and regulators, and I say not, you know, in general, also multilateral regulation is important, to set up the frameworks into which things happen. I think Flora said very well, you know, the governments are clearly important in this direction. Honestly, they are subject to lobbying from all sides. So it's a question that, you know, they are in the midst of a lot of different interest groups, and sometimes it's not easy for a government to understand. That's why I think the Global Compact is important, because it's not a lobby, it's not an interested party. It's something that presents things for what they are.
On that note, let me try and summarize this very rich conversation. First of all, let me thank you, Flora, Feike, and Francesco, for your inspiration, your insights, and perhaps most importantly, for bringing the main points of this presentation to life. Let me try and summarize the discussion. It's in the long-term financial interests of companies and in the interest of society at large that business leaders fully integrate the Sustainable Development Goals into their strategies and organizations. As we've heard many times in this conference, in this summit, and also from today's panelists, the Sustainable Development Goals provide a huge business opportunity. That is to say, if companies have the right leaders. Unfortunately, only 4% of companies require senior executives or non-executives to have a sustainable mindset, or even better, experience with sustainability. So, in the decade of action, we urgently need to select, promote, reward, and develop a generation of sustainable leaders who fundamentally believe that sustainability and financial performance go hand in hand. So the full report, The Decade of Action, is available on the websites of UN Global Compact and Russell Reynolds, in case you'd like to learn more. Lisa, many thanks again for the terrific partnership with you and the UN Global Compact team thus far. Do you have any words of wisdom you'd like to share before we close this session?
Before I just take the floor, Simon, sorry for interrupting you, but I cannot switch off this panel by not making a deep bow for Lisa and Global Compact on mobilizing the business for the UN goals. So I just wanted to say that. So sorry for interrupting.
Yes, Lisa.
Thank you, Feike. That's kind of you. And, you know, thanks for spending an hour in such an interesting panel based on such an important survey with 3 of my favorite real SDG leaders in the world. So thank you. I just want to end by saying this agenda that we discussed today, it's not only a nice to have. And as Francesco was saying, we hope at the Global Compact to put things forward as they are. So I hope you get the time to look at our 20-year anniversary progress report that we have put together with DNVGL, who has actually done a really in-depth analysis of, I think, 7 different sectors, how they are faring on the global goals. The short story is, they know the goals, of course, and there's some good progress, but there's a major transition challenge lying ahead of basically all sectors, from energy to food to construction. And without the proper leadership in place, and I wish we could clone Flora, Feike, and Francesco, we really need to build and mobilize new leaders that are brave enough to drive this breakthrough innovation agenda that we will have many, many years ahead. So thanks to Russell Reynolds for the great teamwork. We just started this amazing topic and focus today, but I think the leadership for the SDGs, that's the mother of all issues we have to deal with to make the SDGs a reality. Thank you, Hans and Simon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right.